Hi, welcome everyone. You are in the webinar Healing Starts at Home, Reimagining Permanent Supportive Housing for Trauma Survivors. My name is Jenny Herget and I'm with the National Alliance for Safe Housing. And I am here to help with any tech needs and also just go over a few things about our Zoom panel before we get started. So one thing that you'll notice in the top right corner of your viewing screen is that there's a couple of different view options. You're welcome to choose whichever one makes the most sense for how you take in information, but I always like for conversations like this to have it in gallery view, so it looks like we're all in a room together, which I know we all need at this point in the pandemic. You'll see on the lower right corner, there's a chat box, and so you can put any questions in the chat. We'll also be doing a short Q&A at the end of the session, so you can put questions there and we'll move them to the Q&A for you. If you have any sound issues today, feel free to give me a chat. The main thing that I usually recommend to folks who are having sound issues is to use the dial-in number, and I'll put that down in the chat box in just a couple of minutes too, so that that's easy to access for everybody. And then the other thing is that we do not have a captioner today, but we will be posting a recording of this session on YouTube, and there will be captions on that. So if you need the captioning, you'll be able to view it later. And we'll send out the link to everybody who's registered so that everybody has access to that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Amy.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you everyone for coming today to our panel on Healing Starts at Home, Reimagining Permanent Supportive Housing for Trauma Survivors. We're so glad that you've joined today. We're also so glad that we have a very honorable guest to moderate our panel today. Supervisor Holly Mitchell is a true representative for Los Angeles and for California. She has represented Los Angeles in the state legislature, where she served as state senator for California's 30th Senate District. Before, she represented the 54th Assembly District. She was recently elected to represent the 2nd District of Los Angeles as a county board of supervisor. And some of Supervisor Mitchell's most notable accomplishments include the Equality and Justice package of criminal justice reform bills. She authored the Crown Act, and most notable for my field of homeless services, she required that all homeless services in California use the evidence-based practice of housing first. She's also a true champion for survivors of domestic violence. And a little fun fact, one of her early career moves was to be a Coro Fellow at the Downtown Women's Center, where I have the privilege to work now. So we love our history with now Supervisor Mitchell, and thank you for your time in this conversation today. I'll turn it to you.
Amy, thank you very much for a couple things. I appreciate the brevity of the introduction. Sometimes people talk too long, and I realize that's why I have all this gray hair in my hairline, because I'm tired. And I really appreciate the fun fact about my connection with the Downtown Women's Center. It's a history I'm very proud of, and so you know I will always have your back and the back of the women that you so beautifully serve. So thank you very much, Amy. I appreciate it. It is a pleasure to have the opportunity to participate in today's really important conversation, because healing does indeed start at home. And I believe having a home is a fundamental right. We as women understand the importance of healing, self-healing, and connecting with other women, women in the movement, women in our community, to talk about those issues very openly and frankly. And so I'm here for it, always. I have the pleasure of having the responsibility of briefly introducing you to all the amazing women on the panel. As my Gen Zer, who is back in my house, often says to me, Mom, just Google it. So I'm going to give you a very brief introduction of all of them. And I would suggest, if you want to know more, Google them, because I know they're there. My job today is going to be to keep the trains running on time, because we want to make sure that we have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of today's panel. And you all can light up the chat with your questions that will help us get to them at the end of the session. So let's get started. So first of all, again, it's my pleasure to introduce Amy Turk, who is the Downtown Women's Center CEO. She has a background in social work, more than 20 years of experience working with women experiencing homelessness. We'll also hear from Suzanne Marcus, who is the Director of Community Engagement and Partnerships with the National Alliance for Safe Housing. She has a background in domestic violence research, programming, and safe housing development. Next, we have Saba Muine. I had to practice that, Muine. And Saba, I have to do my shoulder when I say your last name for full effect. Saba is Senior Program Manager at the Corporation for Supportive Housing. And she's a specialist and community educator on organizational and systems change for racial equity. Last but certainly not least is Tiffany Duvernay-Smith, who is a document specialist at LASA, survivor, advocate with lived experience of domestic violence and homelessness. Welcome to each and every one of you. So, we're going to talk a little bit about the toolkit today. I know that you're going to incorporate all that into your presentation. So, as all of us know, the main reason we're here today is to introduce and talk about this newly released and very important toolkit that stands to improve survivors' access to and outcomes in permanent housing across the country. Amy and Suzanne, you can start us off by telling us a bit about what this toolkit is and how it came to be.
Thanks, Supervisor. We're just really excited to release this toolkit. From a Downtown Women's Center perspective, we've been providing permanent supportive housing for women experiencing homelessness for now nearly 40 years. And we know that a majority of them are trauma survivors, namely of domestic violence, of which our most recent needs assessment reported that 53% of women at the intersection of homelessness and domestic violence had experienced domestic violence. And so we know supportive housing certainly is geared for residents who have experienced this trauma. And simultaneously, in our work with creating the Domestic Violence Homeless Services Coalition in partnership with Rainbow Services, a DV program in Los Angeles, we know a lot about how to provide emergency and transitional shelter for DV survivors, but we needed to know more about how to provide good services and a holistic approach to permanent supportive housing for this population. And so this toolkit was conceptualized in that coalition, and it grew with community partners, most importantly with survivors themselves, but also with architects, service providers, housing developers, and property managers who provided a local and a national perspective, of which Suzanne certainly has a good grasp on the national perspective of this work.
Yeah, so on the national level, we've been seeing for over the last decade plus, increasingly more communities implementing a variety of strategies to support survivors. But even with this exciting shift in the field with rapid rehousing, domestic violence housing first, all these wonderful things that communities are doing, we saw less or slower adoption of permanent supportive housing specifically for survivors. And on the national level, we believe that partly that's because victim services are often daunted by the whole housing development aspect of things. And similarly, permanent supportive housing projects that focus specifically on homeless populations are daunted by providing victim services. And that's what's so exciting about this toolkit, is that it focuses on demystifying both aspects of this work for both these communities. And the topics covered in the toolkit include the implementation of trauma-informed care for permanent supportive housing building program design, considerations around serving survivors of color and survivors with other intersectional identities, avenues for developing long-term sustainable dialogues with survivors regarding PSH design and operation in order to create programs that are truly survivor-informed. The cultivation of strategic partnerships and community support in PSH development, as well as the identification of key funding sources, and considerations for responsive and effective property management, with information on leasing policies, legal housing protections, safety, security, and confidentiality issues.
I would add that, while this is intended as a reference for partnerships that are building and operating housing for survivors, it's really universal applications that could work for any resident of any supportive housing building. And we hope that people see this in our sector as a universal standard of operating, if you will, for all supportive housing.
Thank you for that. I want to acknowledge that in the chat, several people said they were having difficulty linking to the toolkit and the other links. And so just to make sure that all of the links that will be talked about today for all the reports will be emailed to all the participants. So if you're having difficulty clicking on the links, you'll be able to access that information. So thank you for the background and kind of the high level summary of what the toolkit is all about. I hope everybody takes an opportunity to get to it and link it, get to the link and read it. So we know there've been a lot of conversations. I know I'm engaged in them daily about this public health and economic pandemic and how the social isolation and economic fallout associated with it are resulting in spikes of domestic violence, as well as increasing unemployment and housing insecurity, especially in the face of the eviction moratoriums that will potentially come to an end. Every level of government, city, county, and state have all taken action. I think, unfortunately, now we all have different dates. The county took action last month ago that I co-authored to extend it, I think, to the end of February. State has taken action, which will trump all of our local actions. But still, I know it's very confusing to people and unsettling because we don't know what that true end date will really be. This toolkit tells us that housing has always been integral to personal stability and especially to healing for trauma survivors and other vulnerable populations. Tiffany, can you share with us from your perspective what that is?
Yes, thank you very much. And just reminding everyone that I am speaking from a lived experience perspective as becoming homeless as a direct result of my domestic violence relationship. And the first thing that comes to mind is safety. So, of course, physical safety and being out of the elements like the rain, the wind, but also actual violence. So, if you think in terms of emotional safety or the safety of a person's mental well-being, we could also see why someone may need to be housed. So another reason would be relaxation, comfort, and being able to take deep breaths. It is a time to heal. So when I went into permanent supportive housing, it was a very spiritual time for me. I shed a lot of tears and a lot of prayers. So in the first place I was in was 4.5 years. My tears are there. So I hope that the person that's in my unit now is having a very transformative experience. Most of us were born into a home. It's very basic. So housing first is very basic. It's very primal. It's very essential. It's not very rocket science if you think about it. We were warm as babies, most of us. We were well fed. We were nurtured. We were bathed and we were clothed. We slept in someone's arms or we slept in a bed. Basic necessity, food, food and water, right? But food, clothing, and shelter. Food, clothing, and shelter. I want to take away the shelter and say housing because interim housing is not enough. So food, clothing, and housing. Temporary shelter is temporary. It can still promote stress. It can still promote anxiety, knowing you may be homeless again. So in closing, I believe that every intervention needs a pathway to enter permanent supportive housing, regardless of the door you enter through. There are programs out there where I know at one time, Project Safe Haven, has been extended, but towards the end of December, I was nervous about the program, the funding running out. And I'm like, wow, Project Safe Haven is temporary housing for people who've experienced domestic violence who had not yet moved on to permanent supportive housing. So I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to these people? So that's, what I would like to share, that there is a need for permanent housing solutions for survivors of any type of trauma. And I know on my way to being homeless, it was traumatizing, as well as being homeless, as well as being housed, and the stress of, is it actually going to happen? Is it actually going to finally be over? So all trauma, all inclusive. Thank you.
I appreciate you, Sister Duvernay-Smith, for being brave in your willingness to share your personal story and to really talk about emotional safety, which is really, really important. So I appreciate you.
Thank you.
It's my understanding that the main goal of the toolkit is to center perspectives exactly like yours and to respond to them, to acknowledge that housing developers and service providers need to do better if they can learn to listen. So, Amy and Suzanne, back to you. Can you both speak a bit more to the process of how the information and recommendations in the toolkit were gathered? It seems the main methodology of yours was to do exactly that, to listen. Tell us about that.
Yes, that's exactly right. I'll share with you what we learned from our research, both the literature review and then listening to survivors like Tiffany and some of the themes that emerged in the work. In terms of research specifically for domestic violence survivors and permanent supportive housing, there's really not much out there except for the work of Dr. Andrea Hetling and Dr. Hilary Botein's work. From their research, several themes related to survivors' needs and experience are identified and align exactly with the kind of messages Tiffany shared with us. That survivors should be involved in the development of domestic violence, permanent supportive housing program design. That was an important theme that emerged in their research. That there's general agreement amongst the survivors that they spoke with that PSH is fundamental to the healing process. So Tiffany said that being in her home was her time to breathe, her time to heal, and how fundamental that is for survivors' healing process. And the permanency of the housing is fundamental to that as well. And the opportunity for survivors to not have to worry anymore about their immediate housing and safety needs is finally the opportunity to address the full impact of the trauma. This is exactly what Tiffany just told us. So that was in the research, the literature review. And then we turned to listening to survivors themselves. And in December of 2019, Dr. Shanti Kulkarni and I conducted a listening session in LA with survivors who are currently living in PSH. And through the 1.5 hour long discussion, the overarching takeaway was just how fragile many survivors' situations are, even while living in what was deemed, stable housing. So many survivors talked about feeling housed and abandoned by service providers. This theme also emerged in the literature review and the kinds of services survivors say that they need to have ongoing. The research suggests that DVPSH services should be offered on-site and off-site and have practical skills like job search and financial counseling and transportation and childcare and medical services. The key takeaway is that there's just still so much needed after a survivor has housing. It's not the end, but it's the beginning of intensive services and support to really address these underlying issues of trauma healing and supporting them in long-term stability. A second theme from the listening session was the challenges survivors face to building real economic stability. So they're maintaining Section 8 and other subsidized healthcare and entitlements requires them often to stay within a certain income bracket, while at the same time they're being told that their rent is being increased. And that we heard was extremely stressful for survivors. The third theme that emerged in our listening session was that just the ongoing stress of finding and maintaining housing triggers physical and mental health issues, which is often connected to extensive histories of domestic violence and homelessness. I'll share this one quote that a survivor said in the listening session, quote, "Your being in touch with the PTSD doesn't start until you're inhaling and exhaling in your apartment, and you're able to take time to heal and build because you feel safe enough, and then it hits you, then you need help." So that really stayed with us. It resonates with what Tiffany shared. It's really just about how finally you secure housing, and that's really often when survivors have the time to deal with these underlying issues. And the fourth and final theme that emerged from our listening session was that survivors need permanent supportive housing that's specifically designed for them. They talked about how PSH was a blessing, but it also can be a nightmare if they don't feel safe in their community, they don't feel safe in the building. And so those were these important takeaways that we learned from the literature and from listening to survivors themselves that informed our work.
Mm-hmm. And after those listening sessions, we went out to experts in the fields of architecture, service providers of supportive housing, property managers, and housing developers, national experts, and some other themes emerged there that dovetailed with what we heard from the survivors as well. A lot of discussion around coordinated entry and how to do intake, especially with survivors who might be coming from victim service programs that may not enter information into local databases that result into supportive housing intake. So we have a whole chapter on how to make sure we're not creating barriers to DV survivors to enter into supportive housing. Of course, if you hear one theme today, it's that trauma-informed service provision is incredibly important, but it's also important in architectural design. So there's a whole chapter on the architectural design from a trauma-informed perspective. And in that lane, how to balance safety and confidentiality with not replicating dynamics of power and control in the design of your building and the flow of people in and out, but also how to provide actual safety for people inside. A lot of conversation around how to serve mixed populations within supportive housing programs. How communication flows and is coordinated, yet still holds confidentiality between, for example, property managers and service providers. We know it takes a village to cite and move forward supportive housing in each community, and that brings a lot of transparency about who is moving into supportive housing, which also can bring some safety concerns for survivors themselves. So how to balance the messaging of who you're serving in that building without, labeling or stigmatizing or contributing to pathologizing people who just need housing. And, we know this is especially important in the community that I get to work in Los Angeles. We have an influx of new supportive housing coming through our pipeline because of a proposition that voters approved a few years ago. And so we just really hope that this information is useful both locally and nationally as we're all building more housing.
I appreciate hearing about the themes that you took away from the listening session, and what I heard as a policymaker, as women are trying to navigate this space in terms of their income and economics is, I remember as the CEO of Crystal Stairs, women coming to me who had worked through the process, had found employment and were looking at the opportunity for a promotion. But if they took the promotion and the additional income, that then compromised their ability to get their subsidized childcare or subsidized housing. And this conundrum that they found themselves in, that I was often conflicted then and conflicted now as a policymaker, as I'm trying to push these entitlement programs to create more resources, not wanting to exacerbate this cliff effect that women then in effect virtually fall off of and potentially lose these important services, which includes permanent supportive housing. So it's really, I'm glad to hear that and be reminded of that delicate balance I think that we have to all create. Saba, I'm coming to you. So now we've heard some of the key insights that emerge from the process. So what do you hope the service provider and housing development community takes away from it? What main needs does the toolkit address for you and your colleagues on the development side, or at least help get the conversation started?
Right. Yes. Thank you, Supervisor. And thank you to everyone for this conversation. This is just, I think this is exactly what we need. In many ways, shared spaces where we as a community of supportive housing, a supportive housing community can come together and really be a community of practice to understanding how to apply these concepts around trauma-informed care, around housing first, and so that we are not only accountable to what the voters invested in us with these the Prop Triple H that Amy mentioned, and the Measure H, which provides services funding for permanent supportive housing, and so I think that I know, like, for example, one of the areas that I had been able to be in community with that community was in a training space that really turned out to be, a place of mutual support and guidance for people doing this work. And we brought together developers, providers, and property managers so that the developers can understand what it means to serve the population that they're about to endeavor to serve, and so that the property managers and service providers can really understand what the developers are doing and be in partnership. So we came to find out that space was, we're the ones that have to create that space, for each other to have these conversations. And so I'm really happy that we've been able to do that now, further that through the toolkit. And I also want to lift up as well it's a different thing to say that we have to do these things versus practicing doing these things. Like, how do you build a trauma-informed care supportive housing project? How do you meaningfully invest in the leadership of people holding lived experiences and on an ongoing basis? And so I'm really grateful for this toolkit because it's providing us opportunities to understand the how part, which is what we're talking about. It's all good to have these theories, but the how and doing it in community and seeding power and creating structures to maintain those ideologies, I think are super essential and central to development of supportive housing continued. It's a community that we have to, a village, like Amy was saying.
It's a community, and the investment in people with lived experiences, I think I couldn't agree with you more. It's so important. So Amy, Suzanne, let's talk about survivors. What did the research process behind the toolkit zero in on the main areas for improvement for that segment of the population?
Yeah. Well, what Dr. Shanti Kulkarni, who I co-facilitated that listening session with, captures so beautifully in both that listening session, and then she went on to interview and have listening sessions with survivors all over the country. She listened to survivors and developed something called the cycle of housing instability, which really sort of articulates what we've been sharing about how survivors are insecure in all stages of what currently exists for them in terms of accessing, maintaining, and keeping housing. And there's actually a link in the chat to that paper. But in it, she says that this the cycle of housing instability, quote, calls attention to survivors' barriers in getting and keeping housing, and many of these barriers remain unacknowledged and under-addressed by traditional housing and DV services. And that is what I think DVPSH's program model zeroes in on. Exactly that. It directly addresses how survivors often feel housed and abandoned, and they provide the services and support for building real economic stability and support around mental and emotional safety. And this is what I think DVPSH what's the potential for DVPSH is to fill this very specific service gap.
Yeah, so much information came from the survivors about economic stability and rebuilding their wealth and repairing their, financials. So they just kept coming back to that. So we turned to Free From, another organization that has its roots in Los Angeles with national advocacy work. And they do a lot around creating wealth with survivors themselves. We heard a lot about how property management might not have to go from like 0 to 60 straight to eviction if there's some concerns, like really how to partner and get to know your residents and work through concerns in collaboration with the service staff. And we know, evictions disproportionately happen to women across the nation. And it's also very public. So a DV survivor's name is suddenly on public record if it unfortunately has to move in that direction. And so it could pose some very, new dangers that we'd all like to prevent. And then again, back to the trauma-informed architectural design, which I think is pretty new and innovative in our field, and to, pay attention to lighting, to the entrances of buildings, to spaces that build community and also give protection and, alone time, and to think through that design with survivors. For example, we're building supportive housing right now at Downtown Women's Center, and every architectural design is also reviewed by women who also live in our current buildings to help advise us on what would work and what would not work. But of course, Tiffany's the expert on the question that you gave Suzanne and I, so I know we want to hear from her.
I agree, Amy. Let's transition back to Sister Duvernay-Smith. We've spent this last 15 minutes or so talking about general insights and needs. So now let's narrow it down to specific needs. So Tiffany, let's talk a little bit more about survivor needs and experiences. Not only, to allow them, as you so eloquently talked about in your initial response, to give people the opportunity to thrive and heal in permanent supportive housing. Tell us what we need to know.
Okay, so I want to say something about this coordinated entry system that Amy just mentioned, because October 2014 is when I got tapped like, hey, you're off the waiting list, come do your paperwork. And I moved in February 2015 into permanent supportive housing. Well, apparently the VI SPDAT came into effect during that time. It must have transitioned over right at the beginning of 2015, which is this coordinated entry system. The person helping me let me know that if I actually go through this new way of getting into housing, I will not score high enough. And I will not go into the apartment that I viewed and that I think I'm getting keys to. So she advocated for me with the shelter plus care eligibility worker, which I call it the cousin of Section 8 down at the Hackla building, right? For me to not have to go into this coordinated entry system. Do not let this woman do the VI SPDAT. She started her paperwork in October. Can we just skip that for her? That's what happened to me, and I was still able to get the keys to my apartment. So I'm part of the advocacy group with the Domestic Violence and Homeless Services Coalition, advocating to get DV questions into the coordinated entry system questionnaire in order to score higher, in order to be able. But I'm not fully convinced that coordinated entry system is what is supposed to be used in order for people to access housing. And I wanted to say something about Holly's catch-22, which is, so September 2019 is when I came to my apartment. And 2020, during my recertification, I had a piece of employment. I'm Miss Part-Time Job Lady, okay? So a piece of my employment was gone, but my rent did not go down because the subsidy that I'm in doesn't function like Section 8 where they will adjust your rent up or down, right? So currently I am paralyzed right now. So on February 1st, I did not go to my appointment because I don't want to lie. And because I am fearful, I am completely scared out of my mind of being homeless again. So I haven't even been able to bring myself to do my recertification. I need help now. This is the kind of case management services I need that I do not have access to. I'm being honest with the world. So if anybody wants to support me, feel free, okay? Basically, I started a full-time job in December that's slotted to end the first week of June. It's temporary unless funding allows me to continue or unless I get another position that I have my eye on that's permanent, right? And so when I fill out my paperwork, as soon as I say my income, I believe that they're going to make me pay full rent, which is a blessing, of course. But because of my previous experiences and knowing that this is possibly temporary and then my income is going to come crashing down, I won't be able to uphold this new rent amount. And so, of course, I don't want to lie, or I wouldn't be telling you this right here, right? But my mind is saying, my trauma mind is telling me to lie. My PTSD diagnosis is telling me to lie on my paperwork, and I am completely paralyzed with fear. Okay, so I'm saying this is my honesty moment. I do need support. And to answer the question, when I moved into permanent supportive housing, I was already receiving domestic violence services for 2.5 years. And I moved further away. So walking and bus riding were a part of my journey. Also educating myself and learning things such as I did the domestic violence 40-hour training to make myself an advocate to be able to help my DV survivors, right? I did a mental health first aid, emotional CPR. I probably have like 25 certifications, okay? I did a community police academy with LAPD under their clergy program. I am not clergy, but God in my Bible will make me clergy. So advocacy was a large part of my life, especially mental health advocacy and criminal justice reform. And it eventually led to homeless housing advocacy, as well as domestic violence advocacy. So I'm entering my 3rd year of domestic violence advocacy right now. So what if resources and services and opportunities were provided where I lived or by my case manager where I lived? What if my case manager or any case manager in any supportive housing had some type of training? Like here in LA, it's the 40-hour training, but there's got to be domestic violence training awareness everywhere because it's 2021. But the case managers ought to be able to tap into this resource in order for the love and the awareness to flow through them to this person that they're helping, right? Also, trauma. So I'm trained in trauma and resiliency. I can teach an organization or a person trauma and resiliency. So why can't a case manager also be equipped because they're helping a person, right, with a little bit of bounce back? So it's important for them to be relatable, like one of my peers. There's plenty of people with mental health peer support certifications, and I'm bringing up mental health because your mental well-being is compromised. My depression, anxiety, PTSD is directly related to this toxic, dysfunctional, crazy relationship that I was in, that we call domestic violence and domestic abuse. Our mental well-being is compromised. We need some type of healing. You don't have to be medicated. You don't have to even be the label of the diagnosis, just be the symptoms that make it the diagnosis. You know what I mean? I'm into the stigma reduction as well. But I need that to support me in at least connecting me to resources, this potential case manager at a permanent supportive housing location, right? To help me get closer resources, and even on-site resources would be wonderful. And I want to say there's so much paperwork to fill out. There's so much documentation. For example, when I did sit in front of this eligibility worker with all of my paperwork, I would say that was the most, whatever that word would be, day of my life, because I already had to redo everything to be in this 30-day gap that everything needed to be dated and signed, which meant I had to redo everything. And that was even pulling medical records from where I previously received mental health services to take it to my regular primary care physician to say, can you sign this? Even though I'm not getting therapy right now, can you sign this? And I did have to, even though she was my most favorite doctor ever, I did have to go a little, there with her. Like, you're really gonna have a hard time doing this when this can make or break me getting housing? Really? So she did. I'm grateful to her for that, of course. So it kind of puts me to where I am now. So I was told by the person who introduced me to this document specialist position that encouraged me to apply for it, that there was a woman who could not go into her apartment because she didn't have a social security card. So it's one of the vital documents that a person needs in order to be document ready. And so I'm glad to be accepted into that position, assisting homeless people with being document ready so that they don't get at the door when they can be having the keys to their own apartment. I also have to mention intersections, because homelessness comes with trauma, as I mentioned, going in, during, and coming out. Domestic violence can be a possible intersection, or any type of violence, because of things that happen on the street or leading to someone being on the street in a car, couch surfing, whatever the situation is. I already mentioned mental health being an intersection, because all of these things affect our mental well-being. And you gotta know, I had law enforcement contact. And so I'm sure this is also an intersection of people who are in, it could be cyclical for someone. Violence, mental well-being challenge, homelessness, incarceration, or any type of law enforcement contact can be nerve-wracking. So we need assistance with all of this. All of it.
So before Amy and Suzanne build on that, let me just say that the panel just got really real today in hearing and understanding Tiffany's journey and her ongoing needs. And I think that we as policymakers, I'll speak for myself, advocates, stop. We figure, oh, housing, they've got housing, it's all good. And we walk away and redirect our energies to the next person. And Tiffany just made it real for us that she has a need today. And so I'm gonna have complete faith. And even with that faith, I'm gonna do a little follow-up after today to make sure that somebody has circled back with Sister Duvernay-Smith to help her get past her current fear-based paralysis. Because I appreciate you telling the truth. And we have to make sure that the truth, that you are protected in your current situation, having told the truth. Fair enough, everybody? We're gonna make that pledge to each other and to Sister Duvernay-Smith. I'm in.
Thank you.
Suzanne and Amy, building on Tiffany's comments.
I mean, mic drop, Tiffany. Thank you for everything you said. I guess anything to build is when we started the Domestic Violence Homeless Services Coalition, we started with a countywide listening session, 12 groups of individuals at the intersection of homelessness, DV. Loud and clear, people were saying over and over again that they felt like they had to contort their stories in order to qualify for the little amount of services there actually are. And you know, quickly learning if they shared how recent a domestic violence abuse moment was that could disqualify them from something, or if their perpetrator was actually around the corner from a DV shelter, that would disqualify them from getting the services of the DV shelter. Yeah, that 30-day window of making sure every date lines up in your medical record. Could you? I mean, I pay market rate rent, blessed to be able to do so. I could never imagine providing my medical records, 10 plus years of finances. What, you know, like, that's ridiculous. What are we really asking of people to qualify for their most basic human need? So things to work on.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I think Tiffany did a beautiful job spelling out exactly what is needed and what's lacking. I noticed someone in the chat said, I'm a new advocate. What kind of advice do you have for me? And I think, you know, Tiffany, you mentioned you're a document specialist and you're taking with you your experience of what it was like to have to navigate all that paperwork. And now you're somebody with that deep knowledge to say, oh, here's someone who needs help. I know what that's like. I'm going to make sure you get what you need. You get that Social Security card so that you can get into housing. And that is such that lived expertise to bring to your work makes you a phenomenal advocate. And if that isn't something that you bring to your work, then the listening that you can do and to directly inform your practice is what will make you a good advocate. That's what's needed. And that's what I think, you know, this toolkit is built on, and what I think in particular Downtown Women's Center and the DV Homeless Services Coalition has done so well, and what the field is doing too is really grounding our work in survivor voice and experience.
And you all aren't going to invite me to moderate anymore because I have opinions about things. And while I may not have Tiffany's exact lived experiences, as an advocate, most of my professional career, I was always clear that my job was to figure out how to get to yes. And so as a document specialist, your job is to figure out how to get to yes. As Tiffany talked about, you know, the Social Security card is a critical element. We need to figure out how to get to yes until we are in a position to change the policy and make it less cumbersome. I believe the new document specialist job is to do all that you can to figure out how to get to yes for your client. That's the way I view my role as a policymaker. I've got to do whatever I can to get to yes. Saba?
I love this conversation so much. Thank you so much, Sister Tiffany, for sharing your wisdom with us, and for raising that piece about the intersection of all of these different experiences and how we have to think holistically. And so I'd like to raise the intersection of race and homelessness, because all of that part, right? Because all the things that you talked about, you know, the intersections you talked about with regards to domestic violence, mental well-being, homelessness, incarceration, Black people and people of color face all of those issues at disproportionate rates. And in fact, across the country, in every single state, people of color experience homelessness at a disproportionate rate compared to their numbers in the general population. So that's consistent, and we're definitely not exempt of that here in Los Angeles. And in fact, not only do we have that disproportionality, but people of color make up the majority of people experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles. And so if we're talking about healing and thriving in permanent supportive housing, we have to think about, for Black, Indigenous people of color to thrive, we must avoid replicating the systemic racism that basically forged the path to their experiences of homelessness. So we talk about safety. How do you feel safe as a Black woman walking into housing? What does that mean, and what does that look like? I know I talk a lot about culturally specific services, which those principles were really spelled out throughout the toolkit around some of these things about having racially and culturally reflective staff and leadership and opportunities to move into those positions to build wealth, that piece around advocacy involvement and how that is nourishing. We think about racial healing in the context of these spaces, and creating a culture of inclusivity and belonging with regards to people's racial marginalized identity, because these systems were created to maintain a racialized, marginalized underclass, if we look at our history through that racial lens, which is something that we need to continue to do collectively as we endeavor to embed equity in our work, is that we need to have a working knowledge of how these systems became this way, because many of us did not get that education in school. But I'll tell you, once you have an economic and a racial, economic and political standpoint and looking at American history, it will make so much sense. It will make so much sense. And I only had that experience, in the last few years, where I'm like, all the American history I took in high school and in college and whatnot. And so some of the things that are exciting to me around this work, like just going back to what Tiffany said, looking at some research that's happening, looking at the CES triage tool with a race equity focus. So that's some research that's happening coming out of the ad hoc report on Black people experiencing homelessness. Also, we from that work, it was illuminated that, okay, looks like Black people are going into housing at the same commensurate rates to their membership in the homeless population. But then we looked a little deeper, and we found that Black retention, Black people being staying in housing was a problem. And so thankfully, some of that research, so that started as a research project, and we had some preliminary findings that told us that safety is an issue in communities of color. Not only are these projects getting cited in Black and Brown communities that have been intentionally and historically disinvested, but they're getting cited in the most dangerous parts of those communities. And some of the qualitative research that was lifted, it was the California Policy Lab that did this research. And Earl Edwards was a primary researcher, and he shared with us that there was a woman who told him that, a Black woman that said, every time I come home, I run from my car to my front door because I'm for 2 years, she did that. She did that for 2 years because she didn't feel safe.
You know what? It's not a coincidence. That was me.
Oh,
He was talking about me.
I'm so sorry.
I was scared to move where I live, but I needed somewhere to go. And I was grateful that when I walked out of my glass doors, there was a bus stop right in front of there and a bus stop diagonally from me. But these permanent supportive housing locations are not in the best of neighborhoods. And I was scared. So I agreed to move there knowing I could run to my door and I could use that app for when the bus is coming and run to the bus stop. And when I got my car, I did the same thing because parking is atrocious, might be the appropriate word. I don't know. Parking is terrible if parking isn't thought out as we are building. This is what we're talking about now. And so, yes, running.
I'm so sorry. That really upsets me. You know,
Then when I had an actual person talking to me verbally and threatening me, I was really running. So one night I was running to my car and I had footsteps in the intersection. Then I had to deal with this guy always at my door, day in and day out. Every day is not an exaggeration. It wasn't until my husband came into my life and had a talk with him that I didn't know about that I was not intimidated by this guy anymore. And there was nothing I could do. LAPD looked at the sign behind them on the wall, directed me, and that sign was about carrying a concealed weapon, how to get a license to carry a concealed weapon. So I was making big girl decisions, getting tasers, getting pepper spray, deciding, do I need a gun? And I only made it through that with prayer. Like, I need this guy to see 2 7-foot angels with me every time he sees me, so he'll leave me alone. But yeah, that was actually me.
Wow. I mean, it really, thank you so much, Tiffany, for sharing that, because I think it really hits home. I mean, it's so generous of you, and it really hits home to hear a person that's standing next to you that's had these experiences, that had this experience. You can't other that. You cannot avoid the compassion that you feel. And I want to say that word too, love, because all of these ideologies that we're discussing around housing first, around safety, around trauma-informed care is really undergirded with that. And a love for people of color, for Black people, and for commitment to making changes in the way things are happening in our world. Because it's not okay. It's not okay. It's hurtful to all of us, the fabric of all of us, which I think we've come more aware of in the last year around, frontline staff and what that means. That means everyone's wellness. Those people that are farming, that are out there, providing food for our whole system, and people that are risking their lives, to maintain how we function as a community. And so the other things that came up for me in terms of that one piece and then I think we can move on, because I know Supervisor Mitchell, she's on top of things, was that, just acknowledging that that racism has to do with our experiences and being intentional around that. And especially in a therapeutic setting, how can we prevent the people being othered in this space where they're really supposed to be able to lean on, and gain mental wellness. And then the thing about having people that look like you and hiring people with lived experiences, and hiring Black people with lived experiences and people of color with lived experiences, so that there isn't a constant turnover of case managers, and so that people can actually build trust with their case manager, and then also promoting those people, those frontline staff, so that they build wealth over time. And so those are just like some of the overarching themes that really intersect with some of these, experiences that you so generously shared with us, Tiffany. So thank you.
I don't know about you, but I'm sick of Tiffany. She's wrecking my morning with sharing the truth. Tiffany, I am sick of you sharing your power with all of us today. This has just been absolutely amazing. So let's just have a brief kind of broader discussion with everybody on the panel based on what the points that Saba has made in terms of, you know, intersectionality and anti-racism and how all of this impacts the work you're doing every day, the structures we have to build, where we build them, how we build them. I open the floor to all the panel.
You know, the toolkit goes in, I think we've made this loud and clear, that the toolkit goes in depth about, you know, the importance of listening with people with lived experience, employing people with lived experience, really how to support staff at all levels of the organization, you know, to create an environment where they can work on their understanding of this, where training is provided, but also, you know, open conversations, training your supervisors on how to have these conversations, knowing who we're working with, being really culturally responsive. Although there's some universal applications in this toolkit, getting to know who lives in your supportive housing can help you design what the services are. You know, maybe they want to express something through art, theater, dance, storytelling, you know, but it needs to come from them. And what beautiful ways to connect your community too, if volunteering is allowed in the program to, you know, really use supportive housing as a way to build community. So those are some thoughts that are definitely in the toolkit.
And I would just want to add, all of that is connected to organizational culture. And in order to have an organization that centers and supports survivors, like Saba mentioned, the advocates themselves have to feel empowered. And so to really focus on how you can empower advocates to make decisions on their own, that we don't want advocates to think of themselves as monitors or rule enforcers, or we don't want caseworkers to think of themselves as rule enforcers. We want them to think of themselves as advocates and partners with survivors. And that's an organizational shift that is required in order to provide voluntary services, trauma-informed services. It all has to happen together.
Mm-hmm. There's a number of legal protections too that are gone to in depth in the toolkit through Violence Against Women's Act, Fair Housing Act, allowable transfers if the environment that a survivor lives in is not safe. We are required to, you know, create a safe transfer into a different supportive housing program. So there's a lot of education around that, because that, you know, that's kind of complicated and includes public housing authorities' knowledge around those issues and your property manager's knowledge. So we know that there needs to be more education around those protections so that we're providing the right services too.
I want to share about someone that I interacted with last week. So someone at a Project Roomkey site that I'm assisting in getting a lost ID, because the ID is something you need in order to move into permanent supportive housing. And his mom gave me all the information that I needed for the DMV application, but I needed his signature. So I needed to go to his door, and he's not well mentally. He provided me with a paper that he uses for his ID, which is a fee waiver paper that goes along with the DMV application. And he's telling me, I've been using this. He didn't call it a fee waiver. This is good enough. Wherever I need my ID, this is good enough. And in my mind, I'm like, I know that nobody's accepting your fee waiver as your ID, you know, just a piece of paper that's not even completely filled out, right? So just in thinking of creative ways to, how do I get this man to sign this paper so that he can get an ID, right? So I said, I'm gonna get you one with your picture on it. And wow, those miraculous words that he accepted, that I'm going to get him one with his picture on it. And he signed it. And so I'm saying that we have to be creative and patient and loving and meeting people with, meeting people meeting people wherever they are is a common phrase, but it's so true. There's no way I was going to get this guy to sign this paper, right? But I just kept trying different things. So sometimes it's like that when we're assisting people who need help. And I want to introduce you to a word that might not be new to you, but I have a 2021 vocabulary word, and I want to get the proper definition. So this word, I'm building on what Saba was saying about racism, right? And I've mentioned, it's hard to type and spell and talk at the same time. I've mentioned, I forgot what I mentioned. Anyway, the word is criminogenic. So I've mentioned intersectionalities, and Saba mentioned racism. So the definition is of a system, situation, or place causing or likely to cause criminal behavior. And I believe that it is completely okay for me to proclaim that all of our systems are criminogenic. Mm-hmm. And our systems are racist. And it leads people to certain places and to make certain decisions, even if those decisions are coping mechanisms. We haven't all learned healthy coping mechanisms. And if we have, we haven't always had them. Mm-hmm. So being a criminal can be a coping skill, just like marijuana, alcohol, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. drugs, promiscuity, gambling, overspending, you name it, overeating, undereating, all of these things. And so, again, our systems are racist and criminogenic, mm-hmm. which I believe also contributes to Black people.
It absolutely does.
An influx of Black people experiencing homelessness, possibly because of unhealthy things they have chosen, including being in an unhealthy relationship, speaking for myself, staying too long in it, being homeless as a result of that relationship, trying to figure out the systems, mm-hmm. getting upset in that relationship, me being the one with the law enforcement contact because my emotions are off the hook when they come, And then working through all of that stuff when you leave, we need the healing. So I can only speak for myself and all of the work I've done. I know that all of the, I had a therapy for depression. Show me how to get out of depression. Give me the skills I need, not the pills. I need tools for PTSD when I'm triggered. Not medication, not fake therapy. Tell me exactly what I need to do when I'm in the moment, when I'm physiologically experiencing things in my body that I don't understand because my body is remembering something that my mind forgot. Mm-hmm. And it's work. It's work. It's work. I had to do my own work. Mm-hmm. But to have the support and the love and the compassion and the empathy of other people holding possibility for me. Mm-hmm. Knowing that I don't have to stay stuck right where I am. That this experience doesn't have to define me for the rest of my life. So being here talking to y'all is by choice. I can be up and gone somewhere with my husband, living my life away from any kind of drama and trauma and memory, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But I choose to be here because I'm also holding hope and possibility. Mm-hmm. I want to say for one person, mm-hmm. but it's for more than one person, if I can be honest. Mm-hmm. It's for more than one person. I mm-hmm. believe in hope and possibility for everybody. Mm-hmm. And it's our choice to choose hope and possibility. And I'm empowered because of another person.
Mm-hmm.
This person empowered me. That person empowered me.
Mm-hmm.
This circumstance empowered me. This possibility empowered me. And so now I am empowered. And I am here acting all empowered because I am, but it's from what we're trying to accomplish here.
Right.
Through the permanent supportive housing services and architecture, etc. Right? And I imagine an oasis. So I will say that although my apartment was in the ghetto and it was in an unsafe neighborhood, that once I walked inside, it was beautiful. It was bright yellow. It was laid with brick, and there were like nice trees in there. And I can take a bomb picture inside the building any day. Where are you? Are you at a resort? You understand what I'm saying?
Home.
And then I went into a remodeled unit. So it was new everything in there except the toilet and the tub. And then I won a lottery, actually, a housing lottery to move into where I am now in a brand new building. So I've had a chance to experience that.
Beautiful.
So that's my little contribution to this moment. Thank you.
And the palm trees behind you, your picture behind you lets you know that you in the tropics all day, every day.
Right?
I see you. I see you.
I like to bring summer to the winter.
I understand. That's why I have Rosa Parks behind me, because she's got my back always, all day.
Mm-hmm.
So criminogenic. I hope everybody got their vocabulary word for the day. Criminogenic. I hope somebody put it in chat.
Yeah, there's another one too, misogynoir.
Oh, yes, misogynoir. Yes. Explain misogynoir, Saba, and then we'll go deeper into the cultures of co-creation.
Okay, so that's a term that Kimberly Crenshaw came up with, who also came up with the term intersectionality. So we have a lot to thank.
No, misogynoir is another researcher.
Oh, it's not.
No, it is not.
Thank you for
I love
correcting
Kimberly,
me.
but it's another young. You tell them and I'll find it.
That's where I heard it. So thank you for correcting me and giving me that. But basically, it's talking about the intersection of race and you know, and sexism, which Black women experience at, like, I don't think we really have enough research and data that tells us the full extent of what Black women experience from the systems. And thank you, Tiffany, for, you know, all that you kind of illuminated for us, because I think one of the things that makes me so angry and why I keep saying we have to have a working knowledge of the intentionality of the roots of our society, you know, of our government, of our formation as a country to maintain a racialized, marginalized underclass for labor, free labor and land. Those themes don't go away. They haven't gone away yet. And we need to be intentional collectively in understanding that history so that we can be intentional in creating, and it is a creative process, creating equity, because we haven't experienced it before, and we have to do it in community. We have to see power. I love sitting in a circle because it tells everyone that you are integral to this. And every person, especially the people of color and people who hold those experiences of you know, being racially discriminated by every single system in our world. And so when we talk about then like the individuals that are obviously suffering from the intergenerational racial trauma, and our focus is only on, you know, as much as we do need to provide, to be, you know, a respite, like you said, Tiffany, for those individuals and resource those individuals, we have to continue to look at our systems. Now we have a county effort around equity and a city one. And so we have to think systemically, because that's where the problem came from. It's not the individuals that have a problem. The individuals are brilliant and have come so far despite the oppression of hundreds of years. And so it's like, let's think about these systems in ourselves and the places that when the culture, like Suzanne said, the culture that we have needs to be a culture that's racially affirming. And we have to build that with our own intrinsic knowledge and understanding of what it is. Like oftentimes in the trainings that I do, I tell people we need to build a conscious awareness of ourselves internally around what are our biases. Are we meditating? Are we practicing mindfulness so that we can have an awareness of how we're contributing to these systems in order to then work them back and work in community to co-create? So I'll leave it there.
So the woman's name who coined the term misogynoir is Moya, M-O-Y-A, Bailey. Moya Bailey coined the term misogynoir. What a powerful conversation. Let me transition to Amy. These are really amazing ideas, and I know the toolkit offers really many practical examples of how housing developers and providers can facilitate survivor voice and choice into development and operations processes themselves. Much of what we've been talking about in this context of culture co-creation. So Amy, can you share from the Downtown Women's Center's experience what some of those options are that you've seen work well in the past?
You know, Saba's touched on this, but she leads partnerships of service providers, housing developers, property managers through a number of months course to get you to, you know, figure out your partnership and get you through the supportive housing process. But this conversation is being had with those partners because you have so much power in who you're hiring, who you're contracting with, who you're designing buildings for. And it just really, like, this conversation is bringing to light how important that yes is for those buildings in your communities. Like, it is complex, and this is racial justice work. When a community says, yes, I stand for that supportive housing in my community, we're doing our part to like dismantle all this oppression and crap. And, you know, I just think it gets really too simplified when you get to that place of like, you know, getting your representatives to sign off on your building and getting all your public funding lined up. And, you know, so the toolkit really goes into lots of that. Again, back to the voice of lived experience, having formalized ways of having that. We have an internal resident advisory board. Like I said, they're doing things like looking at the architectural design of our new building that we're developing. And then, you know, Tiffany alluded to being a part of the Domestic Violence Homeless Services Coalition Advocates Program. So supporting, we started out saying we're training, but we're just supporting people to be the voice, as Tiffany is, to help, you know, eliminate the policies that are creating barriers for people that have been really lifted up today.
I am, as moderator, monitoring the time. We want to go into Q&A. So if any of you have a very brief kind of closing statement you want to offer, anything that we missed in this really rich conversation, share it now. And then we've got a couple of questions that come through chat. We're going to go to you first, Ms. Duvernay-Smith. But think about any final comments you want to make, and then we'll pivot to Q&A. Tiffany.
So final comments is, you know, I lived in a building where the representative did not properly represent our voice and never brought feedback from the meetings that the agency that was providing the permanent supportive housing had for us. So I believe that she needed training and support to best represent us. Good point. Also, whoever's on in your advocacy group or on your advisory board, we got to remember that they are on a healing journey, whether it's stage 1 or stage 50, and we need you to check in on us and to care about, for example, our housing. I've been in places and spaces not knowing that the advocate sitting next to me was homeless. I've been on Zoom call where someone mentioned, okay, well, I'm sleeping in my car. Okay, and then it's just heartbreaking to me. You know why? Because we can't just like, I know where to go. I know what to do. We have some clues, but we're still not there yet where it's flowing off of our home, right? I also want to mention the allyship group that the Domestic Violence and Homeless Services Coalition advocates were able to be a part of. I feel like I need to come into the light or something. I don't know. But anyway, I have to mention it because it has changed my life. Okay, so this was set up like not a mentorship program, but a reciprocal relationship between the advocates who were homeless as a direct result of their domestic violence relationships. So it's between the advocates and also people who work in the homeless sector or the housing sector or the domestic violence sector. So I was partnered with somebody, I'm gonna say her name, is that okay, Amy Turk? Can I say her name? Okay, so my person was Amy Perkins. She was with the mayor's office working in interim housing. She said, Tiffany, I'm gonna help you get employment. And the reason why is because I'm part-time mama, okay? I hadn't worked full-time in 12 and a half years because of some brainwashing with this relationship, right? And where I feel like I assisted is that I'm on the board of a reentry organization connected to the county interim housing. So I was able to introduce her to my director and give her a tour of what county interim housing looks like, because she was interested in knowing where can she tweak what's going on over there, how can she make their services better. So I just love that she came down to earth with me into the hood on Vermont and Slauson and saw what was going on a county level, right? So I appreciate that about her. I also appreciate that when she went to LASA, she's like an interim director on a Project Room Key, temporary, hopefully because of COVID, right? But that's where these document specialists comes into play. She was like, Tiffany, we're hiring document specialists. Check out this job description. And she's actually the one who said, you know, there was a lady who couldn't even get into her house because she needed a social security card. So in a sense, this is something you will be doing, is helping people get their basic documents to be document ready to go into permanent supportive housing. So I have to lift up, on a closing note, the allyship program, because it was life-changing for me. So thank you, Amy. Thank you, Ann English. She was in the room with us when we were discussing it. And I'm pretty sure thank you to Elizabeth with Rainbow Services, because she is partnered with Downtown Women's Center for the heading up the coalition. So love to all of you. That it was a whole life-changing experience for me that I'm still involved in right now.
Beautiful. And we, at the state, my former gig and now are certainly, hopeful that Operation Room Key can now transition to Operation Home Key. And we can buy some of these hotel motels, do these conversions and make this a permanent. We're going to use the COVID-19 experience and federal resources to lead us to permanency. Closing comments, and then we've got 2 questions in chat. Saba, what you got?
I'll just say real quick, I think we need to continue to do research on the intersection of race and homelessness. There, like I mentioned, and just like any marginalized identities, like there were 2 reports, the ad hoc report on Black people experiencing homelessness and on women experiencing homelessness. We really need to understand all the different, even like racial and ethnic groups and their experiences. We don't know enough about Latinx homelessness. We need to keep going farther. It's really great to collect baseline data that's disaggregated. Like, we absolutely need data, and we absolutely need to continue to do the research that has never been done around these intersections. And that's community engaged, and with like people with those experiences centered, and then returning it to them, and then working for what they shared with us to implement those things, like we're doing as a community with the ad hoc report and the recommendations therein.
Thank you. Suzanne?
Yeah, well, I everything I second, third, fourth that Saba, Tiffany, Amy have said. I just wanted to just let folks know there's a lot of information at this intersection of race equity, DV, SA, human trafficking, and housing at a website that's called safehousingpartnerships.org. We'll put it in the chat. That's the work of the Domestic Violence and Housing Technical Assistance Consortium. It's a mouthful, but if you're looking for technical assistance on any of these issues and intersections, you can request on that website and learn more on all of these intersecting issues. And I just want to say that, you know, LA has really, in so many ways, been a leader on this front. You know, the coalition that folks have talked about, the Domestic Violence and Homeless Services Coalition, is a national example of bringing these two fields that have often not collaborated very well or at all together in an amazing way. They've been a model for the country on really engaging survivors in a meaningful way. And the work that LAHSA's been doing to develop innovative policies that are compliant with VAWA to make sure that survivors are safe. That's all just another wonderful example of the work that you all are doing.
Thank you, Amy.
I'm happy to move to questions.
I appreciate you so much. And so I've seen in chat that there were two that were referenced. One question for Tiffany. I'm wondering if in your many conversations with caseworkers, you felt a sense of empathy and caring from any of them. How important do you believe it is for caseworkers to have DV awareness training, and why?
So I do believe that question may have been early on, because I just mentioned how I'm empowered by a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this. And yes, I have people I love, I can name them.
I appreciate that. And I guess the point is that we need caseworkers to understand that their job is to get to yes. Mm-hmm. And so whatever it takes for them to get to yes, to meet the need of the client in front of them, that's what they need to do. Second question, can we talk more about the central conundrum that was discussed regarding the cliff effect that many survivors face? Insight from Supervisor Mitchell regarding how to support policy changes in this area would also be helpful. You know, for me, you know, when I was in the legislature, I chaired the budget subcommittee in Health and Human Services, and I chaired the full budget committee for the Senate. And it was hearing personal stories like what Tiffany was willing to share. It was my own lived experience as CEO of Crystal Stairs when I was managing the largest child subsidy program in the country, that I came into contact with these real life experiences every day. And so to affect policy change, in my humble opinion, you have to affect policymakers. And while reports are very important, you know, what policy wonk, I read them all still. Personal stories, I think, go such a long way because it humanizes the experience. And so being willing to be an advocate for yourself and other systems involve people. And so telling personal stories and connecting the problem with the proposed solution with policymakers at every level of government, I think is really, really effective. That was the nature of my work before I ran for office myself. That's how I spent, quite frankly, most of my professional career, and what led me to running for office to be a policymaker myself. And so telling your stories, helping connect those dots, giving us a visual. I could see Tiffany's experience and her brilliant aha moment telling him, I'm gonna get you an ID with your picture on it. That was her get to yes, but it also painted the picture for me about how many obstacles her client, then Tiffany, had to go through to get a piece of paper to open the door to all these services. As Amy said, why on earth would you need 10 years of my medical history to validate me getting housing? And so sometimes, you know, you walk into government, I'm experiencing it now at my new level of government, when you ask the questions, why do we do it like this? Well, because we always have. And when you try to chase down the origin, like show me the regulations, show me the code, show me the justification, sometimes it's not there. And so you have to wake up every day with your commitment to get to yes. That's what I do as a policymaker. My commitment to yes is how do I make it easier? How do I make these systems seamless so they're not criminogenic? And they aren't designed in such a way to keep people they are intended to help out. That's how I do my job every day and the commitment I make to my constituents. Amy?
Good.
Those are the two questions that were posed in chat.
Yep.
Where do we go from here?
Yeah, we hope that we have intrigued you all to want to know more about what's in the toolkit and even dive deeper in some of the topics that we brought up. So we want to do a quick poll, show you what topics are in the toolkit and where you want to go next, because we're going to do a series throughout the year of more in-depth conversations. And Supervisor Mitchell will have you back any day if you'll have us. But we'll be seeking other national experts on these topics too, to really help people do this work. So I think we'll pull up the poll.
Thank you, Sister Holly.
Mm-hmm.
There it is.
And
I appreciated sharing time with all of you today. As always, I learned so much. Thanks for the opportunity.
yes, thank you.
I don't want to
So
leave.
we're waiting for the poll to come up.
Yeah, and if folks just want to stay a little later to do the poll and take it, that would be great. If not, feel free to email us or let us know what you'd like to see additional training in regarding what we've talked about today. And we will look and see what people are interested in and appreciate your feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you all. Thank you to our panelists. And again, thank you to Supervisor Mitchell for your time. We appreciate how you brought out this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks all. Be safe. Wear your mask.
Mm-hmm.
Double up. I like to
Yeah.
say that the disposable mask is our fancy undergarment and that second mask is our clothing.
I love that.
Ooh, it's like equal.
Wow.
We're going to do all 6.
Oh, wow.
Starting with number 14, maybe, the property management. Okay. Yeah. And, or sorry, not number 14, that there were
Right.
14 people, now
votes.
they're 19. And then developing strategic partnerships and community support. Mhm.
Although it looks like, yeah. Looks like there's a lot of interest in all the topics.
Yeah, it's pretty even.
That's exciting. All right, well, stay in touch, or we'll be in touch to let you know the workshops that we'll be sharing with you all in the next few months. Wow.
Wonderful.
Great.
Yeah, thanks so much
Remember
for your
to partner
responses.
with survivors so that
Mhm.
your plans will succeed.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, that might be a topic on its own, but certainly interwoven into all these topics.
Right.
Well, this is good information. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you. So are we signing off now?
I think so.
Okay. That was super fun. Thank you, everyone that came. Really
Yes.
appreciate everyone and all the work that you're doing. All right. Take care.